What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Cleveland Pulse Podcast, episode 49. I am your host, Justin Harold, and with me, as always, my co-host, Jeff Santa. Today, we're going to be talking about the Cleveland Browns roster. After all the offseason moves that we've had and the draft, there's a lot to talk about on the defensive side and a little bit to talk about on the offensive side as well. But, Jeff, how are you doing, my guy?
Good. I'm excited to talk about the Browns because there's a lot to talk about, really. I think we're in an interesting part where the offense is boring in the sense that everybody knows that it's going to be basically the same as last year for the most part. And the defense, where it's somewhat similar to last year in the sense where it might be a work in progress. This is actually definitely the better scenario to be in, and the fact that we know where everyone's going to be at for the most part. There's a couple of names that we could talk about and that we're going to talk about, but it just might be, gelling together and meshing as a defensive unit. That's going to probably be the work in progress.
Yeah, like you said, I think the interesting part about the offense to talk about just really quickly is that it's going to go into the first time of having a second-year offensive coordinator be the same offensive coordinator and head coach being the same head coach. So looking for big things to happen outside of that offense with Kevin Stefanski returning, with everyone, at starting positions returning. So no real turnover there. So we'll turn it over to the defensive side where we saw a tremendous amount of overturn. But we're going to start with the position that I think is the most interesting and will have everyone's eyes almost, just pointed in on at cornerback 2. You already know who your cornerback 1 is with Denzel Ward, but I think there's a lot of already discussion about who's going to play that dominant cornerback number 2. Jeff, I'm going to let you start off with this, but I think the 3 names that should be in this conversation should be Greg Newsome, Troy Hill, and Greedy Williams.
Most definitely, those are the 3 names that I feel like Troy Hill is kind of left out, just when people talk about it, just because the draft is more recent than free agency, and the Greedy Williams situation is still, apparently a thing. But I think signing Troy Hill and then drafting a cornerback first overall, which Andrew Berry pretty much has to be pretty neutral when he talks about it, but he says, "Oh, we got Greg Newsome because he was the best available player," which I absolutely love that draft pick. But am I 100% certain that's the only reason we drafted Greg Newsome is because he was the best guy there? I'm not too sure about that. I think Greedy Williams is probably on the outs. I think you have Troy Hill as cornerback 2. And then I honestly think Greg Newsome hopefully is, if everything stays healthy, I think Greg Newsome should be the 3rd guy. And I still think Greedy Williams has some lingering issues going on that they're not 100% thrilled with. They're not ready to say that, oh, Greedy Williams is going to be ready to even play this year. I feel like we've seen it, on the other side of the ball. We see that OBJ is going to be, he's on track to play. They say that about a couple guys around the league. Haven't heard that about Greedy Williams. I don't know if they just don't want to talk about it, but I wish. It's an unfortunate situation because I don't think he's a guy that we could even move. I don't think his trade value is very high, especially with this injury. He's kind of just floating around on our DB depth chart.
I honestly think I'll take the opposite side of that conversation with Greedy Williams. I think that he's very well in the conversation to be in that rotation of 3 to 4 cornerbacks, mainly because of prior injuries with Denzel Ward. But also, if you go back to the year he was drafted, the only year that he's played, he was at cornerback 2 already, and he was already situated with the Browns, with the teammates. So I think there's an argument there for him to kind of sneak his way back in. But like you said, with his injuries and everything, it will be hard pressed for him to do that. Moving on to your Greg Newsome point, I think he's the cornerback 3. I do think Troy Hill is the cornerback 2, but I think something that you could have hit on there with Greg Newsome and the pick of that is that he could be a potential replacement for Denzel Ward, mainly because Denzel Ward is going into a contract year. If you see him, do phenomenal things, there's a lot of guys that we should talk about or have a conversation about in terms of contracts with Baker Mayfield, Nick Chubb, Wyatt Teller, Denzel Ward. And the limited amount of money that we have now with a lot of the people that we have signed. And so, if Denzel Ward plays out of his mind and he thinks that he deserves, top cornerback money, we might not be able to pay him. And, Drafting Greg Newsome, who might not, start this year, could be a potential replacement starter for Denzel Ward, can take a back seat and learn from Denzel Ward. I think that's probably the biggest reason he was drafted at that position. A lot of guys that we drafted are not going to see the field in terms of their, actual position of draft. I think the first two picks that we made are the only people that will see position time at what they were drafted at, and the others will see special teams time. That being said, cornerback 1, obviously Denzel Ward, cornerback 2, Troy Hill. And then, if we want to mix in the safety talk a little bit, who's going to be that third person to come in that nickel set, in that 4-2-5 set? Is it going to be Greg Newsome, or is it going to be Grant Delpit? Jeff, do you want to transition into talking about the safeties and, who might be starting and who might be rotating in?
Yeah, I think that's a good transition. But I think it's interesting how almost unlucky the Browns have been, even with how well it seems they've drafted. At least on the defensive side of the ball, I somewhat in my mind equate cornerbacks to like the offensive version of like a running back. Like you hopefully you get a steal in the second or third round. You don't draft a running back in the first round, and you hope that you could get a Nick Chubb, who is going to be, still a pretty top-notch draft pick, but some guy you don't have to waste a first rounder on, and he's a stud for four or 5 years. I think that that's very similar to how the cornerback situation's played. Not saying that they maybe – I honestly do feel like they do take the most wear and tear on defense. So I guess you could say defensive end if you have high caliber defensive ends, because we see Myles Garrett, he doesn't play every single snap, obviously. But I feel like every play the cornerbacks, they're taking the most wear and tear. So I think that Denzel is someone that, like you said, we might have to get rid of after this year, solely because we're just not going to be able to pay him. I think we drafted Greedy Williams to kind of be in the similar situation. Hopefully he plays good for us for 4 or 5 seasons, and then we move on. We part ways, but that hasn't worked out. Similarly, I don't feel the exact same way with safeties, but I think the Grant Delpit injury, is just, that was heartbreaking last year. Hopefully he's up to par. I think that, most rehab for, Achilles injuries is, I don't know. It's scary. There's a lot of question marks between Greedy and Delpit. That's a lot of question marks right there. I think Ronnie Harrison's solid, but another guy that me and you both talked about last year who was on and off the field a bunch. Yeah. And then, we're going to have to work John Johnson into the scheme. So I think that there's going to be some, I feel like there's some pull for Richard LeCounte to maybe make this roster. I don't see why he wouldn't. I think that I've actually seen a couple of talking heads say that he might be on the outside of the 53-man roster. I don't see how, unless I'm missing somebody. But I was just wondering how you feel about LeCounte maybe not even making the roster.
I think that's out of the question. I think LeCounte makes the roster. I think if anyone's on the outside looking in at that safety position, it might be a Sheldrick Redwine potentially, or Javante Moffett, who is an undrafted free agent, but they really do like him. Either way, one of those three, I think, I don't know if Redwine. Part of me, I really did like Redwine, and I really have liked his play when he
didn't play it. I felt like we talked about him not playing enough last year. I feel like if he'd play more, he'd be really good.
I don't think he'd be really good. I think there's a couple of just like lapses in his play from time to time, but I think when he does get opportunities, he makes the best of them. I think there's just a consistency problem with him. Safety and cornerback, we're going to probably double up in terms of active roster guys because of how injured a lot of those guys were last year. So for me, I think LeCounte makes it. It'll be interesting to see if Moffett gets put on the practice squad, or if, even Sheldrick Redwine just gets straight up cut. We'll see. But I think LeCounte makes the roster, special teams and all that. But going back to that starting group, I think Ronnie Harrison and John Johnson are the starters, with Grant Delpit, figuring into time there. But that's like, for me, the Delpit / Greedy / Newsome tangent of people who, I don't want to say they're all injured because Newsome hasn't played for us yet. But, with those two, Delpit and Greedy being hurt and Newsome being on the outside of that cornerback 2 position battle, when we play that 4-2-5, my question is, who's going to be that fifth man coming in at DB. It could be a corner, it could be Newsom to play the slot, or it could be Delpit playing as a, covering a tight end or coming to be a blitzer. It's going to be really interesting to see how they work those three people into the rotation, I think, on the back half. But, it's interesting to think about with those three for me. I wanted to see what your opinion was on that kind of situation.
I just think everybody agrees and everybody knows we are in a completely better scenario and situation on the defensive side of the ball as we were last year, in theory, on paper, of course. I think this is hopefully the best case scenario if Joe Woods, I think a lot of it honestly falls on Joe Woods more than, a lot of people might even think as far as utilization and rotations. I think last year, Joe Woods, I don't think his rotations were that good. Now, granted, his personnel was definitely a lot more lackluster last year, but we were about 7 or 8 weeks into the year, and me and you always talked about how our defensive schemes, there's only so much you could do with the talent we had, but we always talked about why isn't Redwine out there more, like we've already talked about in this episode. Where's Carl Joseph more last year? A guy who's not going to be around. Unfortunately, he wouldn't have fit into our scheme this year, seemingly, but why wasn't Carl Joseph on the field more? Why wasn't there more utilization of making sure we got Andrew Sandeo out of bad spots, bad downs on the field, bad field positions? Where was that? I think that's the biggest challenge with Joe Woods, especially with the injuries. If Greedy Williams is good to play, should he be cornerback too? I mean, if he shows no sign of anything, or just if he's 100%, perfect through the rest of this offseason, even in the preseason games, I think then he should fight for the number 2 spot. But if he still has to take some time off, if he's not at 100%, why are we going to play him at cornerback too? And just risk, maybe making it worse, maybe ending the guy's career. Same way with Grant Delpit. If this is the perfect Grant Delpit situation. I think Grant Delpit he could be the best. I'm not going to say best defender on our defense, and I don't want to call him a role player either, but as far as a complementary piece on our defense, I think he's going to be the best player this year, because I don't think he's going to play. I would have him playing 40% of snaps, 40% of snaps. And I think every snap is going to be electric when he's in there, and he's going to be able to learn from John Johnson. He's going to be able to learn from Ronnie Harrison, and he's not going to have to play coming back from a major injury. He's not going to be out there for 90% of the snaps, hopefully, like some of our defenders were last year. Some of our lackluster defenders played 90% of the snaps last year. Terrence Mitchell, just looking at some roster comparisons from the previous season to this year. But I think that it's going to be utilization and rotations from Joe Woods.
Absolutely. And, talking about that rotation, let's move to the linebacker position, who also had a very big overhaul and was easily our worst position group from last year. You got Anthony Walker, who I think is the one for sure starter.
Yep.
And then you got guys who play the outside linebacker position who are all questionable to either be starters or even on the roster anymore. So, Malcolm Smith, is he going to be a starter, or is it going to be the guy that we drafted out of Notre Dame, Jeremiah Wosu-Karamoa? I think it's going to be Joke. In my opinion, it should probably be Joke. At least if they don't play a base 4-3, because then they'll both be out there. But after that, you look at guys who have been here on the roster, and even you can make the argument for Jacob Phillips moving to outside linebacker to fill a role, fill a need. But then you look at guys like Sione Takitaki and our guy Mac Wilson, who, for me, it's hard to believe that 2 years ago I thought he was going to be a very great linebacker for this team. I think he still has the potential to be, but has seemingly worked his way into a position battle and even a roster battle. Tony Fields, who's the rookie that we drafted, already got hurt. So that might be good graces for Mac Wilson to make the team and stay on the team. But what are your thoughts on, the starting, 2 to 3 guys, and then the backups who, I don't think we keep a lot of linebackers this year. I don't think a lot of linebackers make it because of that 4-2-5 scenario.
Okay, I totally agree with you. Anthony Walker is hopefully the consistent
Yep.
centerpiece of how Joe Woods builds his linebacking core. I think everyone can agree on that. I think that's why we got him. He's a sure tackler. He's not a coverage linebacker, which is fine, but he's a sure tackler, and he could command the defense. I think that's an underrated part about him. He's going to be an upgrade to BJ Goodson, in my opinion, which that'll be good. Malcolm Smith is very boring because I feel like he's not really a huge playmaker, but he's someone that you might need in there. Honestly, don't know how much Malcolm Smith is going to play. Joke, Owosu Koromoa, he is definitely the spark plug. He's going to be the most interesting playmaker potentially on our field.
Absolutely.
Who knows what Joe Woods could do with him? I don't know if he's going to be I don't know if he's going to be the starter. I really don't. I think that he should be. I agree with you. I think that he should be. I'm not really, there's still a lot of time left, obviously. There's a lot to see, what happens. Hopefully we could just avoid the injury bug that we saw last year in training camp and so forth. Hopefully that's my biggest worry, is that some of our guys start getting hurt again. That's really my biggest worry. I think that's a lot of organizations' biggest worries. But my favorite dynamic to watch is Mack Wilson and Jacob Phillips, honestly, because I kind of want to be high on Mack Wilson just because I feel like everyone is down on him, which rightfully so. But 2 years ago, well, not last season, but the year before that, he was the role player in that core that had Christian Kirksey and Joe Schobert, and he was excelled in that setup.
Yeah.
But Jacob Phillips wasn't on the roster that year. I think Jacob Phillips is going to be a better Mack Wilson complement from 2 years ago, however way you slice it. I think he's going to come onto the field on certain downs, and some of his highlights from last year are for our defense. They were astonishing. Some of his plays in the backfield, tracking, the running back going toward the sideline with the ball, and, tackle for loss. I think he's going to be a huge tackle for loss guy this year. So I think I want Mack Wilson to play. I really do, but I just don't think the cards are right for him.
Yeah, Jacob Phillips I was super high on Jacob Phillips last year, kind of like I was super high on Mack Wilson 2 years ago. For some reason, I like the linebacking group for a reason. I don't know what it is, but it's a reason that I'll pinpoint one of these days. But you're right. Jacob Phillips has tremendous sideline to sideline speed, and I love it. That's why I wonder if he'll make a transition into an outside linebacker instead of that middle linebacker position that he was drafted at and that he played at last year. But you didn't even mention Talkie. Can I assume that that's your guy that you think is out?
Yeah, that's true. I think Talkie is, I don't know. But like you said, I agree with you that we're not going to carry a lot of linebackers. So I think someone's going to be out. Like I said, I like the Mack Wilson and Jacob Phillips dynamic because I think I hope that could be good competition. But if Mack Wilson is not going to show any step forward, I think that maybe it's going to be Talkie and Jacob Phillips. That's a good point. I completely left him out.
No, I honestly think that he's, kind of him and Mack. I think him and Mack are the outside guys looking in at playing time, and whoever's going to be the guy who makes the roster, one of them's going to be sorely upset. But the problem with Mack Wilson is that he got an early jump on his career. I think he was a guy that wasn't supposed to start rookie year. Then Kirksey got hurt and he had to play. Talkie hardly played that year. And then the year after, Mack gets hurt to start the season. I think he comes back a little too early from his injury and does not play well. Whereas, Sione Talkie, he didn't play at all or didn't play much his first year, comes in his second year and essentially progresses and gets a little bit better from the year before, which is, going from not playing a lot to playing a little bit more. And so, there might be an eye at that linebacker position group where the coach is just like, all right, well, one of you's steadily progressing and the other one's kind of, had like a Baker Mayfield moment where his rookie year, good. Second year, not so good. Are we going to see Mack get his third year and, potentially make the same kind of jump that Baker did? We'll see. There's also guys like Meander who are kind of on the, I think they're out on the bend who they're just probably out. Tony Fields probably has that position, but he might also just get put on the practice squad. So the linebacker group, is going to be, in my mind, besides cornerback 2, the battle at cornerback 2, it'll be the most interesting to watch at training camp for me. So moving on from that, I think we'll talk about the defensive line and more specifically the defensive tackles. Jeff, what do you have for this position group?
So the defensive tackles, very interesting. I think that
A lot of unknown.
of a huge amount of unknown might be the messiest defense position besides linebacker,
Or
which
just messiest in general, just on the
you're
entire
right.
roster.
You're right, just in general. But even thinking back to linebackers, like that's why I know you don't like the Tony Fields pick, but I just didn't understand it. Like, how many linebackers do you really need? I know that he might be a special teams guy, but I think he's on the outs for sure. He probably won't make the 53 man. D tackle, young, and then old, because I think Malik Jackson is going to start.
Really? Yeah. Malik Jackson will start.
Week 1. I don't know who else is going to start.
Andrew Billings.
I really have no idea. Billings probably.
That's who I have.
Does Togiai have any impact value? I think Togiai on third down and shorts, I think Togiai might be out there, truthfully.
Yeah, for me, just list off the guys. Andrew Billings and Malik Jackson, I think, pop out as your starters.
They're high on Billings. I don't have any recollection of Andrew Billings. Like, I didn't follow him as in, when he was in college or whatever, but apparently the front office loves him.
Yeah, well, he opted out from last year. We got him from the Bengals for a 2-year deal. He didn't play, so there's not a lot to know about, how he's been. You can go back to his Cincinnati days, which, he was good. He was with Geno Atkins. I just don't think he was playing to that level. And, he doesn't need to be a starter, but, we had Larry Ogunjobi out there who did enough to start and, wasn't a detriment to the team. So it'll be interesting to see, that starting position, if there's any, change outside of the Andrew Billings and Malik Jackson. If they, at training camp, if they start out with one of those two not being in the starting group. But I think for now, that's what it is. And then you have guys returning from the team last year, Jordan Elliott, who was the third round pick, who, he had some moments that he was good last year. He's a pass rushing guy. And, then you get Tommy, oh my God, Tommy Togiai and Malik McDowell, who are your guys that are, they're looking for that fourth position, that fourth D tackle to rotate in with that group. And you already have another veteran in Damian Square from the Chargers who, is a veteran and is established. So it's a lot about who's going to make, because there's a lot of guys at D tackle and you only need 4 to 5 just because of injury maybe, but, you rotate 2 at a time. It's going to be hard to see who ends up being that 3 and 4. Because for me, Togiai, I think, should be within the 3 and 4. And I think Jordan Elliott should also be within the 3 and 4. But you have guys that are established. And then you have the potential of a Marvin Wilson, who, was highly, rated a couple of seasons ago in college, but then, fell off. Could see a return for him to excellence, but that's going to be another interesting group to watch in general. I just don't know how you give them all enough chances to show what they're worth.
Absolutely. And I just think it's interesting. Another interesting Andrew Berry movement is that we drafted Togiai, and then I believe a couple of those names that you just mentioned, we signed after the draft. There was one undrafted free agent, and then we got Square, I think, after the Togiai pick. So I think that's interesting.
Marvin Wilson and Square were the two guys that we added.
Okay. So you draft Togiai, which I felt like he was pretty well liked, at least as far as the Ohio State program went. But then you go out and get more guys who might fill into that position. But this is the part of the defense that makes me nervous. But I really feel like it's probably just me overreacting a little bit, because it's so hard to compare this defense to the defense from last year. Because for most parts of last year, unless I'm forgetting something really big, and I'm not talking about defending a scrambling quarterback, I'm just talking about defending running backs, I thought our defense did actually a really good job.
Absolutely.
I think we had one of the better defensive showings against Derrick Henry the whole season. in
Absolutely.
Tennessee. So it kind of makes me nervous with how good the running backs are in the AFC North, especially now that the Steelers have Najee Harris, that we have a lot of turnover at this D tackle role. But at the same time, I do understand that Myles Garrett is a good to above average, run defender. And Jadeveon Clowney, hopefully he could fill into a similar role. So I know it's not all going to be on the defensive tackle position, but and it's just weird because I never was impressed with Ogunjobi last year. I thought
Mhm.
he was a plug and play guy that we just started on. And I thought Sheldon Richardson, looking back on his numbers, they were, pretty good. They were probably above average for someone who we could have put there. So do I wish we could have kept Sheldon Richardson? Maybe a little bit, depending on, hindsight being 2020. If Jadeveon Clowney's hurt, of course I would have rather kept Sheldon Richardson. But I think we have good younger guys who are unproven and can be hungry at that role, then it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, for me, Richardson, I think, you compare him to the roster of last year, where he fits in terms of like being your best player. I think he's, in the argument for being your third or fourth best player who was the most consistent and actually did the most to help your team win.
I agree.
You have Denzel Ward, who was out a couple of games that, I put him at 2, Myles Garrett at 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you can make I think the argument is at 3 with Harrison, Ronnie Harrison, and
Mm-hmm.
Sheldon
And
Richardson.
Harrison was hurt a bunch.
Exactly. But when Harrison was in, he did make a lot of big plays. But I think Richardson's 3, and going back to the state of the D tackle position now, it's just a matter of like, all right, well, you don't have that one clear guy who's the stud, and that's okay because I don't think D tackle is really a position group that you need unless you're Aaron Donald.
It's
You know,
boring. It's probably the most boring position on the field,
yeah,
but it's
absolutely.
important.
It's important, absolutely. And, you want to be able to stop inside runs because inside runs, if linemen are getting to the second level because they can go and do single blocks on if offensive linemen can take a single defensive tackle and have one of the other guys move up into the second level, that's bad. And, you need that. You need those 2 dudes in the middle to be able to occupy at least 2 guys. One of them's got to occupy at least 2 guys so everyone else matches up. But yeah, I think that's the biggest question mark. I don't think that there's really a position battle more say than it is just like, all right, how good is this position group going to actually be? But I think that unless you got anything else for the defense, I think that's it.
Nope, that's pretty much all I could think of. I just hope that I just go back to the running backs. Najee Harris, probably will be very good. J.K. Dobbins as the lead guy is also going to be very good. Joe Mixon, I think he's got, he could have an average Joe Mixon year, and it'll probably be pretty decent as well. So I just hope that we didn't sell out to get to the quarterback. And I mean, if you have 2 out of the 3, I'm okay. If you could get to the quarterback and you could defend the pass, that's fine. If our run defense isn't top tier. But I do think our defense has a realistic probability to be a top 10 defense in the league.
Absolutely, absolutely. So moving on from that, honestly, there's not a lot to talk about on the offensive side of the ball, like we said at the beginning. Obviously, your quarterback, your running back, your entire offensive line is coming back as starters that were here last year. And then you're getting Odell back, who was out halfway through last year. And then, Jarvis Landry, your number 2, and then Higgins, your number 3, and then the conversation of number 4, which I think is just between Kadero Hodge and Donovan Peoples-Jones, kind of leaves guys like Demetric Felton and Anthony Schwartz, the 2 guys that we drafted in this year's draft, on the outside doing more special teams things than anything else. So I really don't know, Jeff. What do you want to say about this offense?
No, I agree. I think that Schwartz and Felton are picks for the future in the sense where the future might even mean next season. But I think the offense is pretty well cemented. I think it should be. I hope that there's not any, underlying problems that are going to surface from last year, because there really wasn't when it came down to how our offense clicked at the end of the season last year. But I think everything should remain the same, and hopefully they just, knock on wood, stay healthy like they did last year. I think we replaced, maybe like losing like a Kendall Lamb. I think we drafted, well enough maybe to replace him. And then we still have Blake Hance, obviously. but I think that it's going to be the same as last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see much turnover here, but I do see great improvement in terms of how the offense operates from week 1 to the final weeks of the season. So,
Yep.
with that all being said, Jeff, do you have anything else you want to add on before we call it quits?
Nope. I think it's going to be interesting and it's going to be fun to follow. This team's going to be fun to follow. So make
Training
sure
camp's going
you,
to be interesting for sure.
yeah, keep your eyes out for sure. I think there's going to be a lot of storylines, hopefully all positive.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, everyone, thank you so much for watching. If you guys haven't yet, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go follow us on Twitter. Jeff is doing a lot of good stuff there. Really appreciate all the work that he's put into it. If you guys could leave a like, leave your comments. What are you guys thinking in terms of position battles on this roster, and even roster cuts, the 53-man roster final? Who's going to make it? Who's on the outside looking in? And with that being said, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.